One, two, three. One, two, three. Gotta keep it.
One, two, two. One, two, two. One, two, two. Test, 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 test.
I mean, air out there. Let's cut this off. Cut it second. If you- I need you to come on. Hold down mode. Yeah, just hold down. And you can lift your phone. The mute button is just quicker.
Test, 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 test. Test, test, test.
Okay, tonight. For Saturday, I guess. Yeah. Good.
All right. I'm calling this meeting to order. Oh, Karen, you were. Today.
I was not messing with you, I did. My bad.
All right, starting over. I'm calling this meeting to order. Today is Thursday, August 8th, and this is the Town Finance Committee meeting. Those present are myself and Counselor Shoup. Item number 3 is approval of minutes. I'm gonna motion to approve. Can I get a second?
Second?
Any discussion?
No?
No? All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. All right. Next item. So we have 2 topics we're gonna look at today. The first one is reviewing the TIF CA using the new financial model, and then reviewing the TIF policy updates that staff has proposed based on our goal. With that, we'll just jump in and pass it over to you, Karen.
So thank you very much. And I think we wanted to look at a little bit deeper dive into the assumptions and how the fiscal model works. And some of this you've heard before. Some of this is just trying to line up and show you what really happens in the model and how we get to the end point. And so I think Liam is gonna take care of that.
Can you make that smaller? Or it's John? Yeah, John.
Do you want me to do it or?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. All right, so thank you. This is the slide we want to start on. So let's just remind ourselves, well, there's a lot of complexity to this. It really is as simple as we want to generate revenues from whatever somebody is proposing. We want to generate costs based on our own costs of different service levels. And revenues minus costs equals the fiscal impact, and that's either positive or negative. So, you know, when all else fails in this complexity, just remember revenues minus costs equals the fiscal impact. So let me run through the basic assumptions. And we did a little tweak from the last time we saw you, and that was we wanted to get the fiscal year 25 assumptions to align with where our assessor, where Nick thought we were going to be. So we originally had a 5% increase in the tax levy. We dropped it to 4.21%, and that was really to get us to this $11.05 property tax rate, which is what Nick is forecasting for fiscal year 25. And so you want to get that line fixed where you want it, because everything else, you know, works off of that. You start multiplying from your base year. And so again, this is where Nick feels we are. We'll know for sure in another couple of weeks, but residential value went up 53% over fiscal year 24. Non-residential value, we have a standard 45% increase. For each, and that's going to be for fiscal year 25 when we do the reval. For each future reval, which is set in the model for every 5 years, will increase both sets of values by 15%. It's probably low, but it's conservative in terms of how you do the increase. It's also one number to change in the model, and if you want to see 20% or 25%, easy to do.
How does that going up impact the bottom line result? Like if it was higher, does it make the bottom line result higher or?
It does. Well, there's more value,
Mhm.
but the thing is, remember the valuation reval is supposed to be revenue neutral.
Mhm.
So it goes up, but the tax rate is going to come down a little
Yeah,
bit.
that's true. That's
So,
right.
you know, it's not perfect, but
Mhm.
more or less that's what's happening. I think that where that starts to make a little bit of difference is when you have new value coming in that wasn't there before.
Mhm.
And so that starts at the baseline and then that starts to increase as well.
But in terms of the down CEA in particular, if the reval is higher, the value of their property is higher, and that's what's tied into how
right,
we evaluate them. So
right.
could it result in that bonus payment potentially happening earlier that they would get because they're meeting certain criteria around the value that they've provided? Because I recall a lot of it's
Yeah,
not square foot for some things, it's actual
It's-
valuation.
If they do reach the bonus earlier, it's to our benefit, because by then, we're not paying 40%.
Okay.
It's capped
Yeah.
at 2 million a year. So
Mhm.
frankly, the sooner they get the bonus, the better.
yeah.
Okay.
And then they're still affected by the same thing, which is, yeah, your value increased, but we're dropping that tax rate. And it's funny because don't quote me on any historical figures, but, we've been running this a few times. And, when we first did the model, we were a little less sophisticated about how we forecasted the tax rate. And we were doing like a 3% increase in the tax rate. And by the time we got to year 20, to the 20th year, let alone the 30th year, there's a lot of value because the tax rate was, I don't know, $20. But we've massaged the model to do a couple of different things. One, we've added the rest of the town in, so we have a way to generate a new tax rate that is controlled by the value and what we think is happening in the budget. And that's really what we're talking about next here is we've forecasted a 5% annual increase in the net budget. And we've done a 5% annual increase in the revaluation years as well. The reason I separate that is because originally there was some talk about, well, do we have a different increase during revaluation years? So if we wanted to do that, I've set up that I can just change that number.
What do you think about maybe having a more conservative number and reval years? Because this year we came in at less than 1% or around 1%, right, for net budget, or less than 1%.
Like, I think it was, wasn't it the 4.21?
4.21.
For the net budget, where am I getting the less than 1% thing from then?
That's the mill rate.
Tax rate.
Okay,
Yeah.
feels like it was so long ago.
I know. But we can test anything in this in terms of that. And again, the reason I dropped it down below our theoretical 5%, one is because that's what really happened, or we think is happening. And two, I was trying to get to the 1105, which is what
Mhm.
Nick was forecasting. So I had to
And
make those.
historically, our
final.
annual net budget increases are much closer to 3% than 5%. So we see this as a pretty conservative.
Right. Yeah, to answer your question, you were saying, should the net budget increase during revals, do you think be lower? I mean, I don't. I think we need to get used to the idea that like we should be doing revals every 3 to 4 years and that we can't just like take a
Yeah.
hit every 3 or 4 years to compensate for that.
Okay, I mean, I think in terms of modeling, I agree, like keeping it conservative and at least
Mhm.
I'd rather us have a conservative approach.
Right.
Well, and then we look great in a reval year if we're like, well, we're at 5, but you know what? We're gonna go down to 4 this year.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it.
So, that's the beauty of this is we can look at tolerances too, in terms of what really happens. And then again, for future years, for the current reval for FY 25, we did the 5% increase and then our 53% residential and 45% non-residential. And we also added, and we're doing this every year, an additional 1.5% new valuation, not from the reval, but net new development being built. And that's across the town. And so that includes the downs.
Mhm.
So there's a 1.5% increase in townwide value. And we used 5% for net budget increases. And right now, we left just because of when we were doing this, the 2024 budget is the base year. And so we went up 5%. I don't know what that number is going to be, but that's as soon as Nick is finished with all commitment and everything, we'll go back in and tweak that to match what reality shows. So right now it's 5%, and every year the costs are increasing by 5% across the board for every, for all the departments. So.
Can I ask a question on the townwide value piece? So historically, right, we've been closer to 2%,
We've been,
2 to 3.
we've been up to 3, so I think 1.5 is very, we've got great history to suggest that that's a very reasonable expectation.
Mhm.
That's what Nick was comfortable with, and
What are other communities like South Portland and,
I think we've been on the high side.
Yeah, I don't know for sure.
But I don't know
Sense
for
is, I think
sure.
we've been a bit of a juggernaut for a couple of decades, frankly.
Mhm.
And really with the Downs performance, certainly over the line of sight that this model has, I would very comfortably say that we should be looking at 1.5% increases year over year
Mhm.
when we include the Downs in that
Mhm.
catalog.
But again, that's the beauty of the way it's set up. You can change any one of those numbers.
I just
Okay.
want to differentiate, because I was confused by all these 5%. So it says, aren't you saying the same thing 3 different times? And they aren't. They're 3 distinct variables and they need to be different. The last one, that 5% department cost, is important because we're pulling from department costs that are projected out over time to develop the cost side of the equation.
Mhm.
Whereas the budget increases are important for calculating tax rate increases. So they all have a different effect.
Right, right. And they're set up again, so we can distinguish them too, so you
Mhm.
can alternate them. And I think originally we were using 4% for department costs, and listen, I just bumped it up to 5. And we'll true test that when I get the final numbers. Okay, this is really the same thing, it's just in a slightly different, just a different way to look at it. Because, people's brains work differently. So again, the valuation increases in year 6, 53%. And then we did set it up that we can increase townwide 1% number, and we could increase the Downs differently. Right now, we have it set the same. Or for any project that we're evaluating, we could pick a different set of numbers. Right now, I've just made them consistent across the board. Does that?
Mhm.
Okay. And that's true for both the residential and the non-residential. And again, these are the same numbers that you saw before, just like I said, slightly different format. So we can go to the next one. And so this is,
Can I
this is.
just ask a quick question on the revaluation piece, like between commercial and our residential and non-residential? And this might be a Nick question, but you might know the answers. Like, I know in the last reval, is it a true statement to say commercial went up at a faster rate than residential, but in this last one, it was kind of flopped? And is it expected that they will normally be on par? Because that's kind of the assumption we're making, right? Is that,
I think in general, and I don't know about the last one, I'd have to go back and check with Nick. In general, residential increases a little bit faster, and that's because there's so much turnover every year in residential development, whereas a commercial building might not change hands for a decade.
Mhm.
And so they don't capture the value as quickly with the commercial revaluation. And part of that formula that Nick uses is, hey, what have the sales been? And if in residential, you got like 250 sales every year, that's a pretty good indication of what's happening in that market. Maybe there's 3 or 4 buildings that might change hands. So that's why you sometimes see residential going up more. It's just that factor.
and you think the 15% actually kind of normalizes for that?
It does.
That's
We,
blended, that
Yeah.
is kind of 50% across the entire tax base, residential and residential.
Yeah.
Obviously, year six, we have the breakdown because
Mhm.
Nick is doing the work as we speak.
The reason I'm asking these questions, because I'm just thinking as we apply the model, especially to like a mixed use project,
yep,
where it's gonna have commercial or residential and non-residential, if there's a big non-residential piece, and if that is lagging in terms of its year-to-year value growth,
yep,
that it may get inflated if we don't account for that in the modeling. So I'm just, but if the 15% already includes an assumption that like, hey, we're kind of pulling it down a little bit because
Yeah.
of that, and it's not an issue, then I'm fine to drop it. But I'm just curious, like, do you think, is there a scenario, especially with the downs, because it is mostly mixed use development, that we need to pull out and separate residential valuation assumptions from
Okay.
non-residential?
we do have them separated.
Okay,
So we can go in and change any one of those numbers. So if we wanted to say, you know what, instead of 15 and 15, let's do 20 and 15.
okay,
We can do that. And if you wanted to say, hey, I think this project, it's gonna come in already sort of at full value when it comes in. It's probably not gonna be that big of an increase in 5 years as the rest of the town. We can adjust for that too.
Okay.
So, there's all sorts of buttons to push. Okay. And so this is what happens with the value per square feet. So this is a key piece in the non-residential area. And so Nick and I went back and we looked at the valuation per square foot of a number of different developments within town. And we didn't want to do an average across the town. Number one, that was sort of complex to do, but we picked example properties. And so these in 2019, that's really what we were using, 5 years ago. And then 2023, this is when Nick and I went back and level set the numbers again to have a good starting point. And then this is what happens. If you look across, that's what's happening to the numbers. So in 2025, the valuation per square foot for a small retail, about a 189. By the time you get to the fifth revaluation, year 26, we're looking at $320 a square foot. And that's because we're doing that 15% increase every year.
So the 2023 column here is your base and you're
Yeah.
you're adding 15% a year to each of the 5-year increments.
Yeah, the first year we add the 50% or the 45%, and then we add the 15%.
So fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, forgive me. So the 2025 assumes the 45%.
Mhm. Yep.
And then it's 15% for the next 4.
Yes. And again, it's cumulative, so it's building on each other. It's not just going back and multiplying the 2023, it's saying, here, we level set every reval. And in the middle, those 4 years in between the reval, those numbers don't change. The only way the valuation changes, the total valuation, is if new development has come in and we're adding that to the layer.
That's the 1.5% per
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, that's down probably a little bit more, but theoretically, townwide, the 1.5%. Okay, let's go to the next one. So, and I just wanted to give you a sense of what happened in 2023 with housing sales. This is from a commercial, reporting from a commercial broker's reporting of the main main sales. So 283 units sold, 214 of them are single family. Average price of the single family, $742,743. I did the total bedrooms because I use it for other things. And you can see with our single family, the average number of bedrooms of the new units sold, a little more than 3. Of the townhouses, a little less than 3, condos right around 2. So all units sold in 2023 was about, 3 bedrooms per unit. And that's really because, our base is so much of the single family. And then I did try to isolate what was new, what was built new. And so of those 283 units, 68 of them were brand new, were new to the market. So those prices are not just the new units, but that's the overall market, what's happening with what's been sold. The new units are a little bit more expensive, coming in at $837. And I'm going to say that 68 represents units all across the town, not just the Downs. So just gives you a good feel. Yeah, prices went up, and they went up substantially. And then here's the residential value per unit. Again, we started with, 2023, where we pulled different sample units to get those numbers. And then here's what happens in year 6 with the 53% reval. And then here's what happens by year 5, where you're looking at, revaluation number 5, year 26, 1.2 million for an average single family. That's not really unreasonable. I mean, it's unreasonable from a price perspective, but over 20 years, that's probably a conservative estimate of what the average price would be. And we did partly because the Downs has different types of units. Some of them are subsidized, they're senior units. So we have a different price in there per unit if it's been subsidized. And that was really worked out with Nick. And I separated out, I wanted to have a senior apartments that were at market rate, which is basically the same as a regular apartment. But so as they go forward, there may be some senior units or senior complexes that are really market rate. And then those special units, there's sometimes things that don't fit, like a nursing home or like the mooring. That has a higher value per unit because they provide services and they have extra space there. So that's why I have this extra special units that I can pull when I need to, if there's that type of development happening. Okay, next one. And then as we're trying to put the revenue considerations together, there are 4 things we had to do. One, we have to forecast the tax rate, and that's why, we start out with the 1105, and we're adding the 5% increase in the budget, we're adding the 1.5% valuation, and then we're computing a tax rate from that. And I can show you those tax rates when we're done if you're interested. But yeah, the baseline now is 1105, and we go up from there. Or sometimes we go down, because then when there's a revaluation every 5 years, that tax rate does decrease. Number 2, we have to separate all the revenues that are coming from the Downs into 2 pots. One pot we can share with them through the CEA. The other pot is not part of the CEA. And the other pot is the original assessed value. They're paying taxes, so that's great, but they don't get to have any portion of those shared back to them. And the same with excise tax. They don't get a portion of the excise tax, but we forecast those and we add them back in when we're looking at the cost to serve. And then we calculate the amount available to pay for the costs. And that's where it's funny. We have to take out the original assessed value and the excise tax to compute the CEA share, but we put those back in once we've taken the CEA share out, because that's all available to help offset the costs. Is that clear? Okay,
Yep.
just checking. All right. Okay, So these are the actual numbers that I'm using for the department budgets. And we're looking at Public Works, and we forecast that on a per mile basis. And on a per mile basis, the baseline factor for 2024 budget was 30, let's call it 33,000. Now, what does that include? That includes snow removal, that's everything that Public Works does, all wrapped up into a mileage figure. And that was one of the things that the original model that we used, that was created by somebody who does this for their company, that was their suggestion, is that's the best indicator for Public Works. So on a per mile basis, it may do a little overestimating if you're talking about multifamily, because a lot of the apartments, we're not doing the pickup. We're not doing garbage pickup. We're not plowing in that development. That's all done privately. But that's just our average, and that's what we're using. The Downs, just so you know, the Downs does wind up being very efficient because they don't have very many road miles in there. And that's why they can look good on this too, which it makes sense. They're a dense development, so they're not using a lot of roadway.
Yeah, initially they were projected to have 8 miles of roads at full build out. And I don't know how, I suspect we'll be fairly close to that. Supporting something in the order of 2,000 units, so.
Yep. And then police and fire, we worked this out with our former police chief and the consultant that we were using at the time. What they created was the number of calls per type of use. So if you're a single family, you generated X number of police calls. If you're a senior unit, you generated another factor. And really what that begins to sort out is if the senior units have higher fire and rescue numbers per unit. And so that tends to go up when you're talking about senior units. And then the education, we are pulling the full amount. We still have that, just because I forgot to take it out, the fixed costs, but we're really looking at, again, we started in 2024 with the 18.7. I need to recalculate what this year is going to be. And so this is a little eye-opening. By the time you get to the 30-year forecast, we're looking at $63,000 a student. What happens 5% a year. And that's what it is. Yeah, so, and then community services, obviously, community services is low because they tend to take in a whole lot of revenue. And then they go up to like 115,000. Public Works, just, goes from 32 to 111,000 a mile. And those are the numbers we're using in the model.
So my question would be like, again, this still feels very conservative, right? Because like, it's not accounting for the fact, even in Scarborough, as we've grown, enrollment has gone down. And so this is assuming, steady enrollment continues over the course of the period. That's essentially.
Well, it depends on your perspective. What we're doing is a per student number.
Mm-hmm.
But the blended residential bill was 3 bedrooms on average, right?
Yeah,
So with that, there must be an assumption for a number
it's
of,
not necessarily for the Downs, that's townwide.
fair enough, but it's based on the number of bedrooms, is there an assumption based on the number of school-age children? That will
Yes,
be produced?
we're coming to that.
Okay.
So, but that's what's generating it. So, so it sort of takes out how many students, it's not about the students, the number of students increasing or decreasing. It's, hey, how many students are going to be in this project?
Mm-hmm.
And so we've tried to take out
Right, and intuitively, you would think with the residential development we've seen over the last decade, we'll say, that you'd see school population increase, but it really matters what you're building, what kinds,
Yeah.
and really specifically how many bedrooms in those
Mhm.
units. And really what's happening in the existing housing stock.
Right.
That's really what the change agent.
Yeah. And so these increasing educational costs are really about requirements from the state. You know, it costs more to educate every child. So
Yeah.
it's not about number of kids increasing. This is how much it's costing us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we are using the total, we're not using the fixed costs anymore. So those numbers are there, but we are using total. And then same with community services and the library. And then the library is per person and so is community services. So we take the population and multiply it by this, and that's how we get the numbers. Okay. And so then here's the students per household. And this is from the data that we have collected from the schools for the past five years about the dams. And what you're seeing is, you know, it's been separated out into different types of uses. We did the number calculations a couple of different ways, and we took the highest number of students generated, just as a precaution. So what we're really doing is saying, all right, we're going to have 1,985 units total. If we used a all students factor, we'd get 195 students. If we take single family condo and apartments and separate them out and apply their appropriate number of students per unit, that's where we get 253 units. And we take out the senior units because, you know, assuming there's no students in there. So 253 is what we get by using the numbers at the dams. And I'll tell you the single family numbers, students per unit, they're pretty close to townwide. They might be a tenth or something lower, but they're pretty different. And then the rest of these types of units, it's hard to get to from the census. It's hard to get to the exact number because there's so much noise in what the census does. So, you know, I think 253 is probably a reasonable number. We can do a lower number by, doing a blended rate. But I do like this, separating them out.
When we, trying to remember what it was, when they did their enrollment study, and this is why in the GMO, we put the cap on 3 bedrooms, is because it was like, it didn't matter if it was an apartment condo, if it was a 3-bedroom, it likely produced as many students as a single family home would. So what are we assuming, especially in terms of condos and apartments, in terms of bedrooms per unit, because that might increase a little bit condos and apartments.
It could, and what I would say is, we want to look at what happens this year with the numbers. And I think we're going to continue to ask the school department to report on the numbers of students at the dams.
Mhm.
So
I recall from the report that Autumn did, we're like well below the cap we placed. Like we put a cap of like 40%
yeah,
for 3-bedroom plus,
Yep.
including single family.
Yeah.
And so,
because most of their condos are 2-bedroom.
Mhm.
Although, to be fair, because we have the actual counts from the school district, we use those. I didn't have the bedroom counts
mhm.
split out for condo and apartments from the downs. We could probably ask for that, but this is generated strictly from those factors that came from the school district. And that's why I think, we want to continue to watch that
Mhm.
to see how that changes.
I just want to make sure that we're not being too under on this, because seeing that 60,000 on the other piece is a big driver of
Yep,
costs. So
absolutely.
making sure that we feel like the 253 is a conservative estimate,
Mhm.
which I think it is. It's just, this is the one area I think that can be a big cost driver on the
Right.
equation of revenue minus costs, and so I just want to make sure.
Mhm.
Is 253
Mhm.
really, or is it maybe 353 that we need to kind of consider, or even to your point, if we can toggle a little bit to say,
Certainly can.
Right, you're correct. From a sensitivity analysis point of view, this is the variable that, that will certainly, stands to change the results. Karen, do I understand correctly, these numbers are based on what's been built to date in the Downs?
Correct. This is,
So
we've
we
had
need to
5
con-
years of data.
So we need to get, to your point, they could build something different, a
Yeah.
different mix in the future, but I think that we're starting to build some history that suggests what they've done in the past is gonna
Right.
be reflective of what they do in the future.
Mhm.
And,
but
you know,
it's
the,
unlikely they're gonna move to more single family.
They appear to be selling what they're building pretty
Yeah.
easily.
yeah, and I think, in my discussions with them, I think they want to move some of what they originally said was going to be single family into multifamily and do fewer single family.
The phenomenon that I don't think any of us know, but intuitively it seems to make some sense, is they build a 2-bedroom condo, and I'm generalizing here. I suspect that may appeal to a Scarborough resident who raised their kids, they're grown and out of the house, and they sell the 4-bedroom, 3,500 square foot, single family to someone and move into a 2-bedroom condo. So it's that churn, it's whoever moves into their house is what's
Mhm.
gonna affect that number.
Yeah, or even the people
So
in
there's-
Portland who can't afford to live there looking for a lesser alternative,
Right.
but are used to the condo.
So, in some respects, that's heartwarming, right? We're providing housing options that didn't exist, so folks are able to downsize, but still stay in the town that
Mhm.
they call home. So there's
And I-
some value there too,
Yeah.
beyond the financial.
But I think that's the bigger impact, my understanding, when this was really dug into with the schools with the Downs in the past, was they don't produce a lot of students. What was producing a lot of the students at the time was the turnover of people downsizing and the suburban cul-de-sac
Yep.
neighborhoods that we created prior to
Right.
But
the growth.
arguably, that person selling a single family home is ready to sell and is going to sell.
Yeah.
It's whether they
They did not
choose to
move
live
to
in
the
Scarborough
Downs.
or move
Yeah.
to Virginia or,
Mhm.
so I don't know that you can make the Downs responsible for that.
No, I
Someone
think
has
it's
made the
more
choice
the-
to sell their home.
Yeah, that's my point, is that like the turnover, like Scarborough is a very desirable community. I chose Scarborough because I wanted my kids to go to school here.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in the future, I anticipate, as people turn over, their properties will likely be filled with people wanting their kids to go to school here. Like, it's just like the cycle of life. And, part of me wonders, like, how do we account for the aging population in some of this as well? Because again, is that like a normal phenomenon that we need to account for cyclically, where every 15 years there's a,
Well, you got the tail end of the baby boomers, they're 60 right now. And so over the next 5 years, you've got that last of the baby boomers retiring, or well, hitting 65 if you consider that retirement age. So that's a big chunk of the population, although they are dying off because now they're older, sorry, older. Yes, so what I do think though is we probably, and I can pull numbers to look at it. I think we have a slightly higher percentage of senior units here. It's been a popular place to develop senior units, and even the Downs, 350 of those 1,985 units are senior units. So they're not generating kids. So, we've got some basic demographic trends that are coming out. So millennials, even though 5 years ago, 10 years ago, everybody said, oh, millennials, they're not, they're not gonna have kids, they're not gonna buy houses. It's like, you know what? We just needed to wait till they came to the right age.
Yeah.
So they're buying houses and they're having kids.
well, I saw that the generation below millennials is actually buying houses at a faster rate than
Earlier,
millennials.
younger.
Yeah, younger. So it's just, and part of that's because when the millennials first came into the workforce, it was the recession, so they were having a hard time getting jobs. having money,
Exactly.
Couldn't afford a home, so, yeah.
Yeah, I'll just share my own personal discussion we're having in our household. We own a 3,200 square foot house. We live in about 700 square feet of it. don't need it, but want to stay in Scarborough, and it's our cheapest option is to stay in our house.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we're probably unique in that regard, that, you know, where we're gonna go.
And then
So-
when all the grandbabies start coming,
Oh,
you're gonna
good.
want to do the.
There's that too, but,
What's that, grandpa's? Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, there's a lot of competing, competing trends out there about what's happening both demographically and then in Scarborough. So nationwide, millennials are the largest generation right now. They've taken over from the baby boomers. But that is not true in Scarborough.
Mhm.
It's still the baby boomers are the largest percentage of the population compared to millennials. So it's all in flux, and there are a lot of things going on countrywide, nationally. So with all of this, I just want to point out there are a couple of things going on with the Downs. And so Downs is mixed use. So they're moderating the costs here because they're bringing on non-residential, they're doing more multifamily, so fewer kids, more square footage. So that makes a difference. It doesn't make a difference just for the Downs. A mixed use development is going to make a difference no matter where it is in town. The other thing that you'll see is at the Downs, depending on what year you look at, they're anywhere from 31% non-residential to 40% non-residential. And I'm not including apartments in that. Because, you know, that's just strictly non-residential office, retail, warehousing, all that stuff. And so their mix is good. It's better than the Towns because, you know, we're struggling to maintain our 25% mix. Again, 17% of the Downs is seniors. And then when we look at the CEA, one of the things that you'll see when I look at the next slide is really overall, over the 30-year period, we're going to pay to the Downs about 17% of the revenues from the Downs. So early on, it's 40%. Yep. Then it drops down to 10. Then it drops down to 2 million when the 10% caps out. So overall, if you take the bottom line after the 30 years, it's 17% all in to pay for that major infrastructure that is allowing the Downs to go forward. And then again, this is just a reminder, there's a 10% reimbursement triggered in year 19 with this particular forecast. So that's when they hit that 55 million that they're about to be reimbursed, that was the cap for their reimbursement. And then by year 21, that 10% is more than 2 million. And so the cap comes back in to cap them at 2 million. So that's, I don't know, 7 or 8% of their total value. So that's what's going on.
This is where I always get confused with the bonus piece. So is the 2 million, like where is the bonus piece that they get for once they hit their threshold
Yeah.
for performance?
So I have them hitting this in year sort of 18, 19. So when they hit that 55 million, they drop down to 10% rather than 40%.
Reimbursement to 10%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then at 10%, if that 10% goes over $2 million, it drops again and it caps it at 2 million, no matter how much they generate.
Think of it another way. So it's 10%, no more than 2 million per year.
Mm-hmm. But I thought there was another bonus payment portion that they got.
I think it's been characterized as a bonus because theoretically they built out at year 20, but the TIF goes to year 30 and the CEA goes to year 30. So I think some people thought of that as a bonus because they're not really generating new development. So they're
And the premise to the whole CEA, why the town chose to participate was really to offset what, extraordinary infrastructure costs. And they put a dollar figure to that. And so
And we
the
grabbed onto
models,
that.
the 55 million and then the bonus period with all sorts of performance standards built in between was really intended to get them to what we agreed on was a full, the maximum reimbursement, which was in the order of $80 million if they hit all their marks, which at this point, they're off to a start that suggests they will.
And I would say that 55 million was in, 2019 dollars. So they don't hit that 55 million until like year 19. And so that 55 million probably isn't worth 55 million at that point. So it's taken them 19 years to get paid back for the initial investment with really no inflation there. And so, that's where that extra, the additional bonus period, if you will, comes into play.
I should mention the Finance Committee. I think I advised the council, but I'll certainly do it for public's benefit. The CEA has performance standards built in. The first checkpoint is in year 10. Here we are in year 6. They have advised us officially that they believe they've met those initial benchmarks or performance standards early, which is something they can do. So they've submitted documentation in support of that claim. I am now tasked with reviewing that and certifying that whether they have or not. And there's 3 components. One is residential square foot build out. There's a certain square footage number. And then the other 2 are infrastructure related. So I'm relying on staff to help me verify. But by all accounts, it appears that they have. But I just want you to be aware that that process is underway as we speak.
Okay, and then next slide. Can we make that a little bigger so that people can read that? I can read it, but because I'm looking at it here. So this I took from the dashboard of the model spreadsheets. And although the arrows are in addition, because Tom wanted that highlighted and I couldn't figure out I need to figure out a different way to do it. I was trying to loop it and so I went back to basic arrows. The arrows are not in the dashboard. So what this is showing you is, okay, we're going to do revaluation in years 6, 11, 16, 21, and 26. For the total project summary, we're looking at 462 single family units. And that's a little bit backed off from the original forecast of 615. They've got, it's just a simple breakdown. If you're in single family, 462, multifamily, 1,523 for a total of 1,985. And that number has not changed. And then for the commercial, that's what's in the model now. And we are asking them to, hey, this is a good check-in. Tell us if we need to adjust that forecast. This is their, the numbers from their original forecast on the commercial development. And then we've got about 3,600 people estimated and 253 students. And again, those numbers are important because that's how we generate costs for the library on people. Library and community services are based off that 3,600 people. So then I split it out. I looked at year 5 and year 30 for the revenues and then for the costs. And then those assumptions are what you've seen before. And then what I would say is, again, it breaks it out into what's shareable and then what's the excise and then what's the original assessed value and then total available for cost to serve. And that's year 5 and year 30. Did the same thing with costs, year 5 and year 30. And so if you look across to that, as you're looking at it, the top sort of brownish colored box at the top of the right-hand side, that's for fiscal year 5, 7, 15, 20, and 30. That is the net positive. That's the total revenues minus the total costs. Now, remember, that's for that individual year. what I've also done is said, okay, we get paid every year, as do they. So you have to actually go back in to look at a cumulative and look at the development that happens in each of the years between, well, at this point, year 6 and year 30. And then you can calculate the cumulative of that. And that's where this last box with the arrows happens. So that's not, we're getting 485 million altogether in year 30. That's 485 million that we've collected over the 30-year period.
So one thing that would be interesting to include, especially when there's a CEA TIF involved, is after year 30, year 31, when there is no CEA anymore, like what does that look like in your top right chart, just so that we understand and know that is now like the annual surplus, I guess, that are net positive that would come about because you no longer have HIF payments, or sorry, CEA payments. So my guess is in fiscal year 30, because we're no longer paying, or 31, because we're no longer paying 2 million.
Right, you add 2 million to that.
6.
Correct.
Yeah,
I think. it's-
and Yeah, I'm trying to-
Based on the
yeah, I'm trying to think where the,
indexing of the increase.
yeah, with the costs. So there might be a.
Yeah, so there's a
Correct.
cost increase. Okay,
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's an approximate.
yeah.
Keep in mind, this doesn't at all calculate shelter benefit of
No.
of the TIF. So this is the straight financials of.
Yeah. Have you thought about how to potentially approach that? Because I know, okay, because again, that to me is like only you apply that to the model when there's a TIF, when it's, well, I guess it has to be in a TIF if there's a CEA. So there would always be some sort of sheltering benefit associated with it. I just feel like that's really hard with a lot of
Yes.
assumptions to,
And that's why we're sort of separating.
Yeah.
This is the nuts and bolts. This is revenues minus costs.
This is stripped down.
Yeah.
Arguably, it's only going to get better
Like-
based on the shelter benefit.
I would just suggest maybe there's an asterisk that just says excludes TIF shelter benefits, and then maybe also an asterisk that says excludes impact fees collected, because I view those as additional offsets as well for new development to support tax rate stabilization and infrastructure investment. So again, those are other things that aren't captured here. I
Right.
guess the question, while those are like net positives, are there net negatives that we're not including that we need to asterisk? I was trying to think of like, because again, the goal today was to try and like say, how do we
Yeah,
pressure test this? And I was trying to think of like, if we wanted to say something maybe that's not a positive that we're excluding, but a negative that we're
Mhm.
excluding, what are those? I couldn't think of any.
well, I think.
I don't know
that-
if you could think of any, but I couldn't think of any.
Yeah, you know, the big piece of this is, hey, you know, this is never gonna be right.
Yeah.
This is just giving you a trend line with a pretty substantial development building out over time. And we're controlling for a few factors and saying, hey, does this look good? It does. It looks pretty good. And I think the talent of this is to keep doing the update every year so that we can continue to model what's happening. That's the true test of time. In terms of certainly there are things that are not, they're not going to be in here. But you've got your basics.
Yeah.
Got your basics. And there are probably some qualitative things, and that's where the fiscal impact doesn't tell you the whole story of any development. Because there are the qualitative factors, like for affordable housing, for for projects that might be doing other types of good.
Pressures on our facilities that 3,600 new residents bring over time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So we're kind of capped, that would be in the impact fees, right?
That's the
Theoretically.
theory, is that they pay through impact fees and we need to make investments to accommodate that growth.
Mhm.
Right. So, yeah, and it's always, this is a point in time.
Mhm.
Yeah, we're forecasting to the future, but it's all based on that last year.
Mhm.
And every time we update that, that jiggles everything around a little bit. In fact, like I said, the thing that we need to do now at the end of September, during September, after Nick comes out of his Shell from having done commitment, we can do that, the last tweaks on that, and we can do the tweak on the cost to serve and see how far off we are with that 5%.
Remember, we did this model to help inform the council before it decided to grant the CEA, right? Is to really directionally, is this a good deal? Are we underwater? Are we, so on and so forth. So I feel really good now. We're 6 years in. We actually have some hard data that's been built in that's helped inform the assumptions of the model going forward. But it's a work in progress that continually needs to be updated.
Mhm. And I think the nice part of this, and I'm looking at the policy, the CA policy piece, like, I don't really feel like we have a specific criteria that points to this model. So when we update it, we may want to say, what is the, bottom line, the fiscal impact bottom line?
Yeah.
And that should be a criteria that the committee looks at. Everything we have in there right now looks very qualitative in terms of how we assess. And I think this is an important.
Yeah, there is a piece that requires submission of a fiscal
A
impact.
forecast.
Um,
Yeah, for a single project or a simpler project, that analysis is quite a bit easier.
Yeah.
Because it's done over a shorter period, it's defined, it's a lot easier to estimate.
Mhm.
There's just a lot of moving parts over
Yeah.
an extended period of time here.
Mhm.
and again, I think the most important piece of this is to know fiscal impact is only one part of your decision. There's all of this, the other goals of the town.
Mhm.
Whether it's new housing, environmental infrastructure, all sorts of things that you can add to this. So that's basically, what's happening. Again, we'll tweak it a little bit and probably just send you an update to this. We can certainly look at stress testing the student population. And I might say, rather than tweaking the numbers, other than when the new numbers come in from the school district, maybe we run a plus 25% and a minus 25% on the students.
I think that'd be good just to kind of show the range of impact and how it ultimately drives the bottom line.
Yep.
Right, Karen, this is phenomenal work. It, like you said, it's really hard to predict 30 years from now what's going to happen. So we have to make good educated guesses, and you've made a highly sophisticated highly educated model that I think is really strong at least helping with decision making. So I feel personally that this is pretty solid, and trying to look for holes to poke and can't find any. So
Yeah, and like I said, there's so many, you can make lots of choices in here without having to redo. You can look at any of those pieces. Matter of fact, I have it open. Oh, no, because I'm not sharing. There's one slide in the revenue spreadsheet that says, all right, you need to fill in these like 10 factors before we can go any further. And you can ask me to put anything you want in there. But the one thing that I wanted to talk about was on the property taxes. I realized we didn't really show that, but this is the effort of forecasting the property tax. So by 2049, with those revals and changes, 2049 is 1425. And I'm going to tell you, the first time we
Oh, my
did this,
house with 1.2 million.
yeah, yep, but making those improvements. But I think the first time we did this, we just did a straight, hey, the tax rate goes up 3%. And again, we were looking at, I don't know, $20.
Mid-20s.
Yeah. And what's interesting is the reimbursement, lots of things changed. It's completely different. Reimbursement that I think was submitted in the original TIP application was around 79 million for the developer. So the reval and all of that, it's like you're pressing this button here and this button is coming up, but overall, it really hasn't changed the amount that the Downs is getting.
This projects the CA payment over time at just over 81 million.
And that's about, that's 17% of the total revenues generated. Okay,
Great.
so,
So how do we, what is the best recommendation? Because this is one of our council goals to do this. I want to make sure we circle back with the full council on this, because I think the committee has had the luxury of looking at this multiple times with you, Karen, and I feel like it's good for the entire council to just understand. I would love to be able to do this in conjunction with the Downs coming and giving an update on
sure.
what's going on there, even though they're no longer obligated to do that. So I don't know, Tom, if that's something you can talk to leadership to figure out. Maybe this is a non-action item, like Norm, we've had some people come and, or in the town manager report, just kind of do an overview. It doesn't have to be a workshop. I
I
just,
mean, this has taken us an hour.
yeah,
So I'll work with leadership, and I might suggest we see if we can carve out some workshop
Okay.
time, really to give it service, particularly if the Downs are gonna be here, they may have other things they want to add in.
yeah, I think that would be great.
And the workshop may be focused more on results as opposed to, you guys wanted to go in depth on
Yeah.
assumptions, and I think we can streamline that.
Well, I don't know if everybody, like, we can always defer them to watch the finance committee for the deeper conversation, but I think even just you showing the final product and just saying, this is what you're gonna start seeing going forward. We can always tell them, watch the finance committee if you want to understand more about the nuances of the modeling.
Right.
But it just going over what you've created, showing how to interpret it. And we can just validate that we've kind of reviewed it significantly. And again, it's a pretty solid model.
Yeah, I mean, the way we've done these in the past under their obligations on the CA is tell us what you've done, you know, what have you created, and then give us a look forward. And I mentioned the look forward because they're right on the doorstep of moving into the town center section, and I believe they're scheduling a site walk with planning board in early September, which council will be invited to if you're interested. I suspect if they come, part of what they might want to do is to give you a sneak peek at what that looks like, because I think all of a sudden that project starts to get exciting because they're building things that I think the rest of us in Scarborough might be more interested in
Mhm.
than they built to date.
Yeah,
Okay. All right, from numbers to text. I think Liam is gonna bring up the memo and we can have a general discussion. There's a couple of questions that I have for you. And then I think the one important issue is we were originally scheduled for the July meeting of the Housing Alliance, and that didn't happen. So, you know, at your, if it's okay with you guys, we would like to go back to the Housing Alliance. But I did put a draft of that in this so you can see where it's going. And I think the Housing Alliance is, if you've got comments on that, I think they'd be happy to hear that. So let's talk about the housing memo for a second, or the policy memo. Any chance that can get bigger? Yay, there you go. I still can't read it, but hopefully somebody else can. So let's start out with the very beginning. And this is a policy, not an ordinance. And so I thought, well, do we want to take a few paragraphs to sort of level set everybody's understanding of TIFs? It's not necessary. So it's totally up to you.
I think it's good because of turnover in council, like somebody's gonna need the TIF CEA 101, so I think it's great to incorporate.
Okay, great. And, you know, I did my best to not lapse into lingo, but I'll let you guys be the judge if you guys have comments on how we explain this, the benefits of creating a tax increment financing districts. Let me know if you guys have any comments on that. And then we get into the purpose of the policy. And in red, this is not a direct red line, just because I was moving so many parts around, but I tried to go back and say, if I was adding new language, it's in red. It's just not all the crossouts are there. So one of the things, instead of saying the purpose of the policy is to initiate or considering, listen, the purpose of this policy is how do you initiate? Council's going to review it and what the approval process is. So that was just a little clarification there. Because I don't think it's just about considering it. You're reviewing it and you're making decisions. And just clarifying, there are TIF districts that are created, and that's really the council's purview. And then there are the credit enhancement agreements, which involves a third party. So I wanted those separated because you guys get to decide on, do you want to do a TIF for your purposes? Do you want to do a TIF associated with,
So solely to enable the CEA?
yeah, but it's nobody's purview but yours and the community when you guys review it.
And a TIF is a necessary prerequisite to any CEA. You can't have one with the other.
Right,
Mhm.
right. But there are a lot of times when you may decide to create a TIF and you have no intention of doing a CEA. So I wanted that clarified, and this is strictly what the council and the public are to review. And so we just add the affordable housing language in the enabling piece, and we talk about both area-wide and specific sites. And then with the establishment of the TIF districts, I've added in, I've labeled this time frame. This is from the original policy. My intention was not to change anything in the original policy, but just try to put it in a more understandable way. Although I think there may be one or two places where I may have overreached, but I'll talk about those. So right now we talk about the districts being designated up to 30 years. When I go to the CEA section of the original policy said 1 to 30. And I'm telling you, you don't want to do a CEA for 1 year. I'm not even sure you want to do it to 5, but I changed it from 5 to 30 for initiating a CEA. So that's totally up to you guys if you want to bump that up. But it seemed ridiculous to say we're going to do a CEA for 1 year. And then eligible expenses are really, I want to go back to time frame. There's a couple of different things in here. This gives the council the authority to follow just the state's approval process for a TIF or a TIF amendment. In the CEA policy, we have a much more robust process, but just the TIF itself, which is your bailiwick, I've given you this gives you the authority to use the state's process, but that's the minimum. And then I just did separate out the comprehensive plan. Town should consider, I don't know why I changed from will to should. I think I was getting caught up with, this is a policy, so it's up to you. I don't really have strong feelings about changing that will to should, totally up to you guys. And I've added affordable housing to this, and we talked about consistency with the most recent plan. Designated growth areas should be considered as part of the consistency. So what that language does is say, you should look at it, but it doesn't hold you to it if something comes up. And then we do have another point somewhere later on that talks about, there are other governing documents. We've got the comp plan, got to be consistent with that. But there's a bunch of stuff coming online. There's going to be the open space plan. There's going to be a whole bunch of other documents, transportation plan, all of that. And those should be considered as part of this. And I think with the CEA, all that cross out was just some simplification. We want to say in this section, should there be a CEA component of the establishment of the TIF district, the CEA has to go through this process that's in the next section. And then the boundaries, you get to decide what those boundaries are. You're going to take into consideration if there's a CEA that's gone through this process, you're going to decide the boundaries. You may look at the CEA and say, you know what, I don't want to do just a project-specific one. I want to open that up and look at an area. But that's for you guys to decide, not for a project to tell you what they want to do. And again, this is where you talk about other supporting documents recognized by the community. Personal property, that's been there all along. We're not including that in the revenues available for CEA purposes. And I was trying to simplify the excess funds statement because it was a little clunky. What this says is TIF districts that include one or more CEAs shall include a provision that directs any excess funds after the CEA is satisfied to either qualified project costs as defined by the district or the state, or to the town's general fund. So you got two choices there. All totally up to you guys. And then I think we're just a little clarifying. I put in the section about amendments. Some amendments have to go back to the state. If you're amending the program costs, you have to go back to
Can
the
I
state.
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Which one of these is the one, it's either excess funds or maybe it's 7 and 8 combined, where we're talking about the percentage that we put in, or that we're shielding the value from?
Mhm.
So which one of those is that? And then I'm wondering if we need to add language that just says, it's advised that gets assessed every
Sure.
so often to make sure it's either there's qualified projects that you need to shelter more, or if we get to a point where we have too much sheltering, where it's going into a fund that we don't have qualified projects for, we need to shift it back to
Right.
the general fund. So making sure there's like a trigger in the policy that says something like, it's recommended that capture value is assessed every so often or every 3 years to make sure that we're optimizing it for what's on the
Right.
town's
We don't
horizon.
have that in here. It wasn't in the original. The original was focused on if we had excess funds, what are we going to do with it?
Mhm.
And the excess funds were, I think, originally defined as, hey, we had a CEA, they topped out. No, we don't owe them anything. What are we going to do with that difference?
Okay.
But we can certainly add, right now the policy says, hey, you can do a TIF or a CEA for 30 years,
Mhm.
up to 30 years. It doesn't say what you just explained,
Yeah.
that,
And I think that's an important nuance. When this policy was first established, I don't think we all fully understood the captured value piece and how we need to continuously reassess that, especially as the value grows. We don't want to shield as much, or because then we might not be able to have qualified use projects and have to modify what we're shielding.
so if we say something to the effect of, percentage modification of retained taxes, the town by a vote of council majority may modify the portion of tax revenue to be retained in the designated development districts. And then we could put that sentence on the end of that.
Yeah, just something that makes it clear that this is where we are talking about, like, well, what's the percent we want to put in either a TIF development fund versus the general fund, and make sure that, again, while we do that at the initial establishment, it's something that you should revisit at I don't want to say annually, because I don't think that will make sense, but I know specifically with the Downs, we went from, what was it originally, 3% to 100%, and now we probably need to bring that down unless we start to see that there are qualified project costs that we would want to maintain that 100%. And so it really does need to be assessed at some point.
Well, okay, so is that really covered in excess funds? Because we're saying it directs
John's
any
looking for
excess
some
fund.
Kind of an internal trigger that requires us to do some sort of review
Okay.
on the frequency.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a suggestion for what that trigger is if it falls? Think about that.
Maybe every 3 to 5 years. Like can we be that general 3 to 5 years?
I think
or-
staff will be looking at it annually to see
Yeah.
where we're at. But
Mhm.
this is your policy. If you want to have the council through its finance committee or full council do it formally, if you will.
What do you think? Do you think it would be formal, or do you think, or even if we just add language that staff will reassess annually and provide a recommendation as needed?
Yeah, I think that serves it.
I just feel like we need to like say, there's some commitment that, you know, Tom at some point is gonna say, hey, I've assessed things and it's part of the budget process, I would assume.
Yeah,
And
right.
like, we need to
Right.
make an adjustment. We're good still, we think we should keep this going.
And it occurred to me, we may also want to have, and we should monitor the shelter benefit
Mhm.
on an annual basis. I think I have that figured out. I may take that out if I.
Yeah, I think that's complicated, so I would say it would be great to be able to, if we had confidence that we can do it
Yep,
super accurately, but I think that's a number that people are gonna.
And Karen, can you guarantee you'll be here for 25 years?
Yeah.
well, I will say, I think I finally, because I also worked it out with the state of folks who are a little threadbare on their methodology on calculating the shift. But I think I have, at a minimum, the school funding formula absolutely down. There's a lot of different reports the state generates, and I will tell you, different funding formulas use different data that are called the same thing. That's been my experience, putting this together.
Population estimates, for instance?
Oh, yes, population estimates, but even like the revenue sharing formula uses a different year of state revenue dollars. School funding formula is different from revenue sharing. Same factor, state revenue sharing, different years.
Yeah.
Try lining those all up. But I think we have it down, and I can add that, and I can send that to you for the next meeting. You probably don't want to see me again, but I'll just send you the memo. So then we're getting into, all right, so you want to do a credit enhancement agreement. So if a project within the district seeks assistance from the town in the form of a reimbursement, then the town may enter into a partnership. And then this is just a really good description of the CEA that was already in the policy. And then this goes through.
Do we want to distinguish this section, again, similar, I know we built in the affordable housing CEA component. Do we want to call this one the economic development
This actually is general considerations for CEAs.
period? Okay.
Yeah, so regardless, you're gonna follow these pieces.
Okay.
And that's where I did change that 1 to, 5 to 30. Do you think it should be 10 rather than 5, or
Fine.
5 is fine? Okay.
Do you have a thought on 1, 5, or 10?
I agree with Karen, that one just seems ridiculous.
Yeah, it
So,
does,
I mean,
yeah. We wouldn't want them to come through this process and go through the
I guess I just
rigmarole.
don't know what's typical. That's what we do, I thought.
You don't see a lot of tips below 10 years, I don't
I've never
think.
seen one. below
Yeah.
10.
Yeah, it's like, you might go through the
15
project
to
for
20.
5, so it's up to you. And again, remind, it is a policy. If there's an extraordinary circumstance, you can always say, okay, we need to do this for the following reasons. So I will change that to 10. And that makes it more predictable. You don't want a lot of people coming in, hey, for the next 5 years, can I get reimbursement? The 10 years implies, hey, we're serious about
Yeah,
this.
it's a long-term investment.
Yeah. And so this area in yellow, I left it in, the level funding adjustments. The council may consider including a requirement in a CEA that during the application process and during the life of the TIF and CEA, the applicant shall demonstrate the funds are being used at appropriate levels for the purpose intended. If the level of funds the applicant receives exceeds the projected need, the amount returned to the applicant shall be adjusted. Well, that's complicated. I mean, I think I understand what what the intent is. And what I'm wondering is, do we really take care of that? Well, let me stop there. What's your thinking on this particular piece?
What I interpret this to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is in the application, they say, we're planning to put $100 million of infrastructure in, which is why we need
Right.
a CEA, but then they come to show that they only put in 80 million. And so does that adjust how much we would provide them, or?
Well, the question I have is, wouldn't that violate the CEA to begin with?
Well, the CA would have to speak to that.
Yeah, that's
This,
what I was
this
thinking.
policy is not enforceable. The CA is a
Yeah.
legal financial
Yeah.
document that is enforceable. So
Yeah,
and in the Downs, we created this performance standard system that spoke to those, demonstrate to us that you've met these things that we think
Mhm.
are valuable.
so why don't we leave the topic, level of funding adjustments, but we talk about the CEA, which is a binding contract.
Yeah.
Is going to, and there's some reporting that's required. The CEA is gonna dictate how you report, when you report, and what you're using that money for. And it's gonna have stipulations about what happens if you don't meet the progress report. So if you don't mind changing this, leaving the topic the same, but talking about the contract, the CEA contract doing that.
Level of funding adjustments doesn't
You know,
make
Okay.
sense to me. What you're describing is we're gonna agree to a performance-based approach for,
for intended purposes.
Yeah.
Something like that.
and everything you just said, I think makes sense. And that should be in the language, but I think
Okay,
saying that all payments will be assessed through a performance-based approach where we will do what you said, I think that's what is in the CEAs, and that should be what's
Right.
agreed to. We would say, in order for you to get it, you must demonstrate X. And if you don't demonstrate X and lesser, then you get less, or you get nothing, whatever it is.
Let us come up with some language that
Mhm.
considers that performance-based approach.
yeah. And the one above addresses it a little bit, which says the credit enhancement agreements may contain provisions for the suspension or termination of benefits to the applications provided for in the CEA. This may include penalties for not meeting agreed upon targets, performance thresholds, and or timing. And that's why this number 7 seemed to be covered in
Up to
6.
7, frankly.
Yeah, I think you just
Okay,
add in that new section on performance and how we establish in the agreement a performance-based.
I think we can just touch up 6, drop
Yep.
7 entirely and touch up 7 to,
that'd be great. Okay,
I think it really.
Is that
speaks
okay
to
with
it.
you, Karen?
Because it's gonna be addressed in the CEA contract is what you're saying?
Mhm.
But I think
We're
it's.
talking, I don't
Go
know,
ahead.
I generally, it's just, we're talking about the credit enhancement agreement, CEA, and this is,
right.
I don't think it's wrong to repeat ourselves and make things clear.
Mhm.
Generally, I understand the verbiage is a little difficult, but
Okay, well, let's take a crack at sort of combining those and making sure we get the language in there, as well as, the specifics of, hey, we can suspend, reduce, or terminate your benefits.
Yeah,
I think that says it all.
yeah,
You can't unless the CEA says.
Yes, exactly.
Says that, but
well, I mean, then maybe that's the policy, is that all CA agreements will. The town shall push to.
Yeah.
Include performance-based approach that gives us the ability to suspend, reduce.
permits or a design construct will be
Yeah.
performance-based.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Which I think is really what the intent of 7 was. It feels
Yeah.
kind of weird as written.
when we have 4 minutes.
Yep, we have 4 minutes.
all right,
Can
so
we,
let me,
can we maybe give you, Karen and I give you some thoughts
yeah,
rather than continuing to go through it? Do you
Yeah.
have any specific thoughts?
Mhm.
So my thoughts are, when we get into the application process in step 8, when we talk about the process we use, I would like to see us maybe not just put in here, one, I think we shouldn't say we're gonna combine a public hearing and final action in the same meeting. I think given what these are, it's important that we always have a first reading, public hearing, second reading separate. And then I would also suggest that maybe if there's a certain dollar threshold as well, you had the 5 million in the other part, like, how do we say there needs to be added public process to it in terms of a charrette or something that, again, when we're talking like a major thing, like we did with the Downs, not that those are gonna come every so often, but where do we draw the line to say, this is big enough, and if it's a big enough dollar value, we need to ensure that there's sufficient public engagement in the process, not just the standard first reading, public hearing, second reading, but something in between that allows the community the opportunity, the time to really understand, because we are, essentially taking taxpayer dollars that would otherwise go in a general fund to provide to the developer for economic development reasons, which is not a bad thing. But I think the councils would really like to hear from the public to make sure that we understand, especially when we're talking really big dollars like the Downs. So I don't know what that public process is, but I just feel like I would like to see for consideration more definition of, in the event it's over 5 million or whatever the right number is, that there's a more robust
And
public
that's,
process.
and that's 5 million in reimbursement? I'm not sure what that.
Yes,
Okay,
I think so.
okay.
I think that's what was intended. They originally had a smaller amount and it's just like, put that 5 million as a threshold. That's pretty low in the scheme of things.
To your point with the Downs ones, it was done and ready to be voted on in October. The council chose to hold it over until December till the new council was seated. So there was additional process, but there was also that further protection
Yeah.
that let's let the new councilors.
And we may very well have done that for the Higas, TIF and others as well. So again, I think if we just
Yeah.
memorialize a little bit, that we understand that this isn't just like a normal ordinance that we're passing.
Yeah,
that
should
this is a-
consider additional review and public process.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll come up with some additional language.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, good.
And then in the affordable housing piece, I thought everything in there was great. Part of me is wondering, does there need to be a reference to the GMO, like in the event they come forward and we don't have any permits available, like, what does that mean? So I just felt like there might
Okay.
need to be something about the GMO. And part of me is also wondering, rather than the finance committee evaluating affordable housing CEAs, should that be evaluated by the Housing Alliance?
Well, I think
that
that's
what's
a
in here?
question for you, whether or not, I think what we were thinking, take it to the Housing Alliance, get their opinion, and then bring their thoughts back to you guys for that review.
For finance or to the full?
I think it goes to finance. And that's the other thing, there's this weird, point which I'm trying to find, where the finance committee is almost done and there's negotiation that's happening, and then all of a sudden the finance committee gets inserted in the negotiation, but I can't figure out what's left to negotiate. So I would say, finance committee, if you want to be part of a negotiating team, has to occur
On
earlier.
step 5, we added in, I don't have the page number. Step 5, we added in Housing Alliance,
Okay,
kind of at the front end.
okay. So but I'm just thinking when we do the actual evaluation, kind of like how the finance committee would evaluate, would we have the the Housing Alliance do that evaluation?
Sure. Well, I don't think we had I think it was only a finance committee, like Sedco is involved in, Sedco doesn't get to score.
Mhm.
Sedco gets to participate in a joint meeting, and so we were trying to model the Housing
Okay.
Alliance after that
That's-
too.
I think that's.
Set it up for your
Yeah.
consideration of the details.
I didn't see, similar to an appendix C in the current policy, how we had like the scoring. So do you have that, or is that? what
I
you-
left that out until the Housing Alliance, and you guys do that, then I'll put the Housing Alliance back in. And like I said, and this gives Tom the ability to appoint I call it a project coordinator that oversees what's going on.
Mhm.
Certainly, it's probably me for economic development. I'm happy to do the housing ones too, but I just sort of made it more generic, so he gets to choose who's shepherding the project through from the staff perspective.
So it sounds like for this one, there's a little bit more work to be done, and we'll get a second review of this, maybe and review it at the next finance committee meeting and
Mhm.
I mean, I feel like it's 90% there. I
Yeah.
just think it's, do we want to do one more final?
I think as you reported, at goals last night, is that
Mhm.
right? Yeah, last night. I think this is very attainable for the council
Yeah.
that currently sits to.
Do you want to see it after the Housing alliance sees this?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think it would be good to let them see it first.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're
So as
gonna
long
be in
as-
between, so I think
Okay.
the timing works out well.
Okay, and then the last thought is, I do want to figure out where you got, if you want to be part of, quote, a negotiating team.
I think that should be at the council level decided perhaps. I don't know if the finance committee should be on
If,
the negotiating team. I feel like I think that's something we allow
Yeah, I
staff to do, and then maybe if there's a desire to have the chair, vice chair.
think of significance, I'm gonna pull.
yeah, that was just part of the process is, after all of this is done, if the council agrees on the application has been met, then the council will vote to allow the town manager to form a negotiating team to include a town council member, but it's in the wrong place.
Yeah.
It feels like.
Mhm.
I think for the council to evaluate a request, it needs to be negotiated and fairly finite, right? What are we talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so think about that, where they
Okay.
come in.
Great work on this, Karen. Thank you for putting all the affordable stuff in there too. So with that, I'm gonna open it up to public comment in case there's anybody in the public who would like to comment on anything we discussed. And if you could just state your name.
Hi, Marvin Gates, 423 Black Point Road. Thanks very much for having the public comment. My eyes glaze over here. I do have two suggestions. One, I'll start with the second one first, which was in relationship to what you said, John, about engaging the public in this last section of and volunteering now that I'm off of the Long Range Planning Committee and without great familiarity about how the Housing Alliance fits into this. It seems to me it would be valuable beyond the Finance Committee. And obviously you've read every word, but
Mhm.
this is maybe above the pay grade of the Long Range Planning Committee. But if I were on the Long Range Planning Committee still, I would be up to the task of reading this and then just giving some common sense feedback about what, the public might think about it in relationship to your answer or question about
Mhm.
public engagement. I'm not saying a charrette isn't a good idea, but short of putting this to referendum or something like that, which I'm not suggesting. That's just an idea. Maybe long-range
like that.
planning might be a place to go with this. And then the other suggestion is way outside of my comfort zone, but when you're talking 30 years into the future with the PowerPoint, obviously, I don't think the town has had any TIF that went 30 years in the past. But
But we have.
I'd love, well, love is too strong. I'd very much like to see what we're talking about 30 years previously to what compared to 30 year hence, if that makes sense. And I think that would get at least me into the ballpark of, I can't even get my head around 30 years into the future. And
Me neither.
I'd love to believe it, but yeah, and that might help me, but
Yeah.
thanks very much.
No, I love the comment, and maybe that goes into like, when we talk about public process piece, how do we leverage our committees to give an opinion? Maybe it's long range, maybe it's transportation, maybe it's, again, the appropriate committees that, think about the things, maybe the school board, I don't know, but I like the concept of when we have these big decisions over a certain dollar threshold or something, part of the expanded public process is ensuring that the committees, beyond just SEDCO, beyond just the Housing Alliance or whomever, have an opportunity to opine and provide more formal input. I think that's a good suggestion. Thank you. All right, is there Anyone online? I can't see. Nope, nobody with their hand up. All right. So with that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.